and found a book called Sam's Teach Yourself HTML in 24 Hours or Create Your First Web Page in 24 Hours.
Yeah.
That one spoke to me. I sat there and read a bunch of it, and then actually went back out my car, grabbed a piece of paper and a pen. I didn't have any money. So I copied down a bunch of code onto a piece of paper and went home and said, all right, well, I'm going to try to do this. And it was just a basic like hello world HTML page.
All right, hey everyone. In this video, I'm talking to Don Felker for the Tech Track series. I first met Don when he was a panelist at the Stanford Android class that I taught, and all the students loved him. So I thought it would be really great to have a more in-depth conversation. And so we ended up talking about how he got into the tech industry, which is a really inspiring story. We talked about his choice to become a software consultant rather than being married to a particular company. Also, his attitude toward financial freedom and what that means to him. And finally, health and fitness. So a really wide-ranging conversation, but it was really interesting for me because I think it really shows the value of persisting and keeping your mind focused and what you can achieve if you do that. If you like this kind of conversation and the Tech Track series, please hit that like button and subscribe so I'll know to keep making more of this. And if you have any questions or comments, drop a comment, and I'll also leave links for all of Don's social media in the description as well. What I want to do actually is start out with some rapid fire.
Mm-hmm.
So don't think too much. I'm just going to throw out some questions. First one, 3 words to describe yourself.
I'd say disciplined, driven, and determined. So 3 Ds: disciplined, driven, determined.
A lifestyle change that you've made during the COVID pandemic in the past year or so.
So on May 28th, I started what's known as the 75 Hard Live Hard Challenge. And it's 75 days of working out twice a day, drinking a gallon of water, no cheat meals, and there's a bunch of other things. But I started it on May 28th, and that ended on August 11th. And then what I ended up doing is I just ended up keeping the workout program going, and I haven't stopped working out every single day. Today's day 255 in a row where I've worked out every single day.
Wow, that's insane. Okay, and then a piece of advice that has changed your life.
So this one's probably gonna be twofold here, mainly because it leads into a principle. But the piece of advice is that you have to watch what people do and not what they say, mainly that the medium is the message. So if someone says that, hey, I don't eat fast food, and then at lunch they go out and they get some fast food. So which one are you going to believe? You're probably going to believe what they actually do. Now, this goes into all forms of relationships. It goes from professional to business to romantic to everything. You have to watch what people do versus what they say. And that kind of leads into the principle of just trusting your gut. Your gut instinct, in my opinion, is nature's security system for you. And so when you feel that something is off, you need to listen to that, because in my experience, every time I've not listened to it, it's come back to bite me.
I like just doing that to kind of give people a broad overview of like, okay, here's the tidbits of Don. But now talking about, the actual narrative of your life and how you got to where you are. So can we start with actually how you got into software? I know you don't have the traditional, like you didn't get the 4-year computer science degree and work at a big tech company. Can you talk about how you got into tech?
Yeah, it's actually a very interesting story. So I never touched a computer until I was 20 years old. I mean, there was the occasional time when I had to touch a computer, but I didn't have one. I didn't work on one. I grew up racing motorcycles and doing stuff like that. And so I actually went to Arizona. I'm from California, Northern California. Went to Arizona to become a motorcycle mechanic. And at the time I had a girlfriend, and she was getting ready one day. And she was notoriously really late getting ready, about 2 hours at a time. And I got really impatient, said, well, what am I supposed to do for 2 hours? And she said, well, just get on the internet and go look up something. And I said, well, what's the internet? That's literally what I said. This is 97, 98. And she says, well, you don't know what the internet is? And I said, no, I've never been on the internet. And so she logged on. I think it was AOL at the time. And she went to AltaVista. For those that aren't familiar, AltaVista is a really old search engine that was around before Google. That's been the main search engine. That and Yahoo for many years were the main competitors. Mm-hmm. She asked me what I was interested in, and I said some band name, and she searched it, and a whole treasure trove of information showed up, and I was sucked in. That 2 hours flew by. I did not want to get off the computer. 2 weeks later, I took all the disposable income that I had, which was about $250, and bought my first computer. Didn't know anything about them, just knew that it fascinated me. And then at that point in time, I was just looking at whatever these things were online, web pages, and wanted to know how to build them. So again, I didn't have any money. Where did I figure out how to do anything? It was either through a book or a magazine at the time. And so I went to and this is in Phoenix, went to a bookstore, Barnes and Noble. And if anyone's in Phoenix who's watching this, it's the Metro Center Barnes and Noble. I have no idea if it's still there. And wanted to learn how to build a web page. So I went to the Barnes and Noble, went to the tech section, and found a book called Sam's Teach Yourself HTML in 24 Hours, or Create Your First Web Page in 24 Hours. Yeah. That one spoke to me. I sat there and read a bunch of it, and then actually went back out in my car, grabbed a piece of paper and a pen, and I didn't have any money. So I copied down a bunch of code onto a piece of paper and went home and said, all right, well, I'm going to try to do this. And it was just a basic like hello world HTML page. And I did that for about 2 weeks after my motorcycle school, my mechanic school that I was going to. I'd go down to Barnes and Noble, I'd copy code down. And this is before I knew that there was online tutorials. I didn't know any of this. None of my friends grew up with computers, and I had no one to ask. So I did that for 2 weeks until I could buy the book. And then once I bought the book, I started slowly creating web pages. And then I found, of course, the online tutorials like WebMonkey, which is pretty old back in the day. And I just started going from there, and then slowly started building into a tech career, which we can get into if you're interested in. And went from Unix and spent many years into web until 2008, and then accidentally fell into mobile, and kind of just gone from there all over the place.
Yeah. So one question I had is, in these early days when you were first discovering the internet, it sounds like the allure in many ways was just like the promise of being connected, learning anything, right? So how much of it? So that certainly was there. Did you have a sense of like, I can make a career out of this? I can get a good paying job. I can start my own company. Did that cross your mind at all, or you just didn't know about any of that?
Yeah. So the first aspect of it was, how do I build this web page? Because I've always been a builder. And when I went to high school a long time ago, I was always in wood shop. I always built cabinets and everything. And every year I was in wood shop. I just loved that. I was doing mechanic stuff. I was repairing cars, building cars. And so building a web page on the computer was almost like taking this physical art form of mechanics and construction and putting it into a digital format. So like I felt like I just transitioned into a digital format. And then after I was doing that about a year and a half, I ran into someone. I was working at Discover Card at the time, and ran into one of the network engineers, and he told me about what he did. And then I kind of just, through getting to know him at lunch, learned about how much he made. It's like, wow, you can actually make a really good career out of this. And that's when I really dove in head first, determined that this is what I'm going to do. And I kind of put the whole motorcycle thing as my plan B, and dove in and started learning it more and more and more.
Nice. Okay. That's a really good story. I feel like so many people who watch my videos and stuff, they don't necessarily have they haven't been studying computer science in school for 4, 5, 6 years.
Oh, yeah.
And you're a good example of the success you can still find despite not having formally studied it.
Yeah. Well, I have a blog post. It's called Learning the Program Sucks. You can just Google my name and Learning the Program Sucks. And it's about my story of learning the program. When I was in one of the programming classes, I think it was Java like 101 or something. And I didn't know how to install Java. And this is back in the day we had floppy disks, and you had like 15 of them you had to install Java off of. It's ridiculous. And the weird part is when I was working on my computer, I would get myself into a weird state where I couldn't get out of it. Like I had no idea. Like we've all been there. We're debugging, something breaks, and nowadays we can figure it out. And if you've been working with computers, you can figure it out after a period of time. But I couldn't then. I was stuck. So the only thing I knew how to do was to take that reset disk that comes with your computer, put it in, hit the CD-ROM, and reset my entire computer. I must have reformatted my computer, I don't know, 50 plus times at least. And that was a 5 to 6 hour process back then. So, if there's a will, there's a way. And that was the only thing I knew how to do. So you just kind of had to roll with it. And that's what I did.
I like that. So going into the Android side of it. So you mentioned like you got into Android in 2008. And one thing I think that is quite interesting is I know you wrote a book, right, about Android development. You were like, I think quite early in that. So can you talk about how you got into Android and also what prompted you to actually write a book?
Yeah. So great questions. In 2008, I was working as a consultant doing web software. at a consultancy in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And at the time, I had was it the Danger? I forget what it was called, the Sidekick. Those old Sidekick phones were like the big thing before
Yeah.
Androids and iPhones. I had one of those. And finally, when that was out, it was time to get an upgrade. And the G1 was out on T-Mobile. And that's who my carrier was. And I said, well, I'll just take one of those. And then I started looking up about what it could do. And I happened to be on the bench in consulting, which means you're in between clients. And I was working at a consulting firm. So when you're on the bench, you're supposed to be learning something new so they can market that skill. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to try to write an application for this Android phone. And so I just kind of wrote a couple of test applications. It was in Java. I was doing C# at the time, but I had done Java in college, and C# and Java, the syntax is very, very similar. And I just created a couple of apps, and the first couple didn't do anything. And then I thought, it would be cool if I was really into watching like Dave Chappelle and a bunch of comedies at the time. I said, if I could make my ringtone a Dave Chappelle audio clip or something like this. So what I ended up doing is I ended up creating probably 30 plus different soundboards for Android of all different audio clips from all these different comedies, not thinking at the time that that's probably illegal. But I made all these clips and I put all these apps on there. They're free apps. I didn't charge for them. And I put them up there, and within 3 to 6 months in the Android market, I had at least over 9 to 10 million installs just from these soundboard apps.
Wow.
And at that time, a couple of my apps would just hang out at the top of the entertainment section for months at a time. And that's at that point when I realized, wow, there's something really in this. And then I had companies like Verizon reaching out to me, and a couple of other companies saying, hey, we see your apps out here, because they could contact you through the Android market at the time. Could you create some apps for the new Verizon Droid, or would you be interested in doing this? I went to the consultancy I worked at, said, hey, we've got these companies that are interested, and they're like, we're a .NET shop. We don't do Java. This mobile thing is kind of it's a phase, like it's not happening.
Right.
You can do it on the side if you want. And I was like, okay. And so I just started doing stuff on the side, which kind of just led me to talk about it on blogs, to write about it. And then I just started presenting at local user groups, and then at code camps and at the local conferences and regional conferences, just talking about, hey, here's how you can build an Android app. No one else was doing it. I was one of the few people doing it, but there was a lot of interest. And just through doing that, randomly one day in my email pops an email from the publisher, Wiley, who publishes the Dummies books, and says, hey, our author just fell through for the Dummies book. People are really recommending you to write it because you seem to know what you're talking about. Do you have any interest in wanting to write a book? And when I was in college, I had a math teacher that had kind of gotten to my head that said, if you do anything, you want something to last beyond your own life, and writing a book is one way to do that. And I thought, I'm like, that would be a pretty cool bucket list item, is just write a book.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of had it there. I never knew what it would be about anything. But when the opportunity came knocking, it just seemed like serendipitous, almost perfect. And I just said, yeah. I had just had my daughter, terrible timing, but it was one of those things like, this is a perfect opportunity. I might as well take it now. And so I said yes to the book, and I had to write the book, which was the weird stipulation. I had to write it in 6 weeks. I wrote 80% of it in 3 weeks, and then the last 20% in the last 3 weeks. So it was quite the endeavor.
Yeah. I'm really curious. How was your experience with the book? Because I've heard that, economically, you don't get much reward for writing a book.
Mm-hmm.
And I also have heard that it's very kind of, it's like what you have to like focus, deep, intense work for weeks or even months, typically. Would you write a book again? And how did you enjoy it?
Would I write a book again? Yes, I'm in the process of writing a book on consulting now. It's a different type of book. I won't ever write a technical book again that's like programming. And even back in 2010 is when that book came out. By the time it hit the shelves, the second chapter, which is installation procedures, were already completely out of date because it changed.
Android.
Yeah, and many things changed very quickly. But I will write one again. I'll probably write a couple of others. They're just going to be more evergreen, and that's kind of the same. You'll probably get the same response from a lot of other people that have written books as well in the technical field, simply because it's just such a high churn thing. Now, what was it like writing the book? It was very intense. I knew I had a deadline, and I just mapped out the chapters that I had to do. and I would just wake up every morning at 4:30 in the morning and write for 3 to 4 hours. And then I would go to my consulting gig for 8 hours. And then at the time was able to, my wife at the time was able to go visit her sister, and it gave me a full week off where I literally would sleep about 4 to 5 hours a night. And then I'd work my work day and then write the rest of the time just to get it done. And then to answer your question about the financial reward, it's not that lucrative. You write a book in the technical industry to get your name out there. You write it for notoriety. When you write the book, you're considered the expert in the field.
Yeah.
What that does is it literally puts a stamp on your name and puts it at the top of the list saying, hey, this person knows what they're talking about. And you're going to have tons of opportunity just from that alone. So the financial reward comes on the back end. If you're doing consulting or you're doing anything like that, that's a fantastic opportunity. For people that want to really know the numbers, I'd probably say anywhere from, I think I made anywhere from overall about $30,000 to $35,000 USD off of my book since it came out, 11 years ago. What they do a lot of the time is they will, if it's a big book that has a lot of demand, they'll say, hey, we're going to give you a kind of like a retainer.
Okay.
It's going to be not even a retainer. They're going to give you half up front and then 75% when you're almost done, and then the last portion of it when you're complete. And that was a $10,000 nugget. They said, hey, we're going to pay you $10,000. You'll recoup that through royalties. And then after you recoup it, then we'll start paying you royalties through a check. And thankfully, at the time, there was no other Android books out there. It went really popular. For 2 weeks, it was the #1 bestseller on Amazon, on Bookscan, all over the place for tech. And it did really well. And thankfully, I made that level of money, which even that level of money is considered an anomaly in the tech industry.
Yeah. And actually, it's a good segue to kind of the next thing I was going to ask about, which is that you have a track record of putting your name out there and educating and providing value to the community. Like you mentioned that you went to meetups or user groups about Android back in the day. That led to a book. We can talk also later on about like Fragmented, which is probably one of the most popular Android podcasts. Caster.io is a pretty prominent learning platform, right? So I'm curious, how do you think about, is that something that you like enjoy teaching and enjoy the education? Or is that like, because you're a consultant, you have the need now to go out and like put your name out there, build a brand around this stuff? Like, how do you think about that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that's a good question. Back to the story of reformatting my computer over and over, trying to learn to program. It was probably one of the most frustrating experiences of my life. And there was many times where I just give up. At the end of the night, I'm like, I'm done. Screw this. I don't want to do this anymore. It's too frustrating. I don't have anybody I can ask questions to. And I wanted to quit. So many times I wanted to quit, but something kept drawing me back to it. It goes back to that gut feeling of like, there's something here. And so I trusted that and kept after that. But what drives me to share this information, to write a book, again, that was the bucket list. But when I was writing the book, I asked myself, well, when I learned Android, what did I do? I actually went and downloaded, at the time, Joel LaPena, I think he works at Google now, was a consultant somewhere, and he actually wrote the first Foursquare app. People remember Foursquare, and he had open sourced it. And so I'd actually downloaded the code from the original Foursquare app and learned through reading his code. And it was pretty advanced at the time for me. And so when I was writing my book, I thought to myself, what book do I wish I had? And how do I wish it was explained to me? And that really helped me like teach in a way where people could digest it bit by bit. So when they went from chapter to chapter to chapter, we just kept building and building and building. It took a lot of rework, but it worked out pretty well. And that kind of segued into everything that I've done, from writing blogs and speaking at conferences. Is I've always just enjoyed sharing what I've learned, because I'm not someone who can read something the first time or watch a video and be like, oh, I got it, no problem. No, I'm the person who has to go read it once, then I gotta go try it out, then I gotta go watch someone else do it, then I gotta go to reread the book, then I gotta go to reread the documentation, and then I gotta try it 5 other times, and then I gotta step through with a debugger, and then finally a light bulb goes off. So when people think, oh wow, like you figured it out really easy, I'm like, no, I've been back here in my office cranking away on it for 10, 12 days trying to figure out how this library works. And now I just figured it out. And it's usually at that time when I finally figure it out then I'm bit with some inspiration of like, all right, now I need to share this so no one else has to go through that same exact pain. And that's kind of where Fragmented came from. That's where Caster, the learning platform came from. All that was just sharing that knowledge of like, all right, I can build it. Now let me go teach you how to build it so you don't have the same problems that I had when I was learning.
So how universal do you think that advice is, or that track record? Like if you're, software engineer at a big tech company, you have your stable job, you don't really necessarily need to get your name out. Would you still recommend being super active in the community, presenting at user groups, maybe even writing a book? Or do you think this is something that is kind of unique to your field as being a consultant?
I think you have to want to do it. If it's not something that you're interested in doing, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. If you really enjoy working at, one of the FANG companies, Facebook, Apple, whatever, Google, if you enjoy working there and that's what you do on a day-to-day basis and you enjoy going home at 5 or 6 p.m., like the more power to you. There's nothing wrong with that. If you want to see what else is out there and you want to go work for yourself, which is what, and early in my career, I realized I can't work for people. I want to manifest my own destiny. I want to be in control of my own life. I don't want someone to be able to say, all right, Don, you're done. We don't need you anymore. And then my life's upside down because I don't have any other options. I felt very fearful of having that situation happen. I saw it happen to people in the automotive industry, the repair industry, the electrical, electricians or whoever. I've seen people just be laid off after 25 years of service. And now they had this carrot in front of them their whole life about, hey, if I get to the end, I'm going to have a pension or I'm going to have all this. And they didn't plan properly. I didn't want to be in that situation. So I wanted the ability to control my own future. And so consulting was a way for me to do that. And I happened to fall into it at the same time as just sharing all this information. And then it kind of just fed itself by sharing more and more information. You're marketing yourself, you're marketing what you know, and you're getting your name out there. And at that time, people then start reaching out to you saying, hey, can you start helping us on X, Y, and Z? Or maybe can you consult with us for a few months on this? And these things just start to snowball over time. So they kind of feed each other, and it's what's worked out best for me. And if you're interested in that, then that's definitely a good path to go down.
Right. And I think this is a perfect segue into the next thing, which is about consulting, right? So I think the way you framed it is really apt, because I think this idea of, I don't have a boss, I can set my own hours, I can dictate when I work, where I work as a consultant. That's so alluring. Yeah. And the other camp is, I go to my 9 to 5, I have a steady, stable income. I get, health benefits, dental, all the good stuff that comes with that. So I guess 2 questions. One is for someone watching who's a student in college or young in their career, how do they decide which one they're better suited for? And do you have a roadmap on how to become a consultant? Because my sense is that it's typically going to be harder to do that right out of college or as a younger person, compared to if you have the expertise of a mid-level or a senior engineer, then you can kind of laterally move over to consulting. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'll answer the second part here. It's going to be much easier if you have experience. You need that experience because people are hiring you for your expertise. Right. It's going to be really difficult to go out there and be a consultant in the field if you don't have any experience, because they're hiring you for that expertise. Can you rephrase that first part of the question though?
Yeah, the first one is the allure of, setting your own schedule, setting your own time. How do you, if someone is watching, how will they figure out which lifestyle or which camp they should be in? The consulting camp or the 9 to 5 full-time job camp?
Yeah. So I'll give you the story that I had and then how I came to that conclusion. In 7th grade, I was with my best friend in his bedroom and we were reading comic books. For those that are familiar, you may have known Todd McFarlane. He drew Spawn and he created Venom and all those kind of things. We're all familiar with a lot of those. And we were reading a comic book by Todd McFarlane, and my friend at the time, he looked at the signature on the front, and it was Todd McFarlane's signature. And he says, man, how cool would that be to work for that guy one day? Yeah. I said, yeah, that would be cool. Well, little did I know, 10 years later, I'd be working for that guy. And that's exactly what happened. I ended up randomly, just through luck and perseverance, got a job working for Todd McFarlane. And at that time, I brought my friend at the time from 7th grade on to work with me. So we both fulfilled that dream. But it was at that job, at my dream job, where I realized this is it. Is this, I finally made it here? Like, what else is left?
Yeah.
And I had started seeing people, lose their jobs and not have the security of having everything in their own, being able to control everything themselves. And that's when I started experimenting with consulting on the side. And so what I started doing just to see if it was what was working for me is I just started taking small consulting gigs on the side. Met some people in the entertainment industry. I started doing a few websites for Atlantic Records and Capitol Records and of bands, and just created some like back in the day Flash websites and stuff like
Mm.
that. And just to create income and see what that felt like to, all right, submit an invoice and get paid
Yeah.
and so forth. Like, is this something for me? And that felt like it really was for me. But how do you really know that it's for you? I think it's one of those things where you just kind of know that what you're doing now is not what you should be doing or what you want to be doing. But
Mhm.
there's also something you have to realize about consulting. I mean, it's very risky. There's times where I won't get paid because this just happened a month ago. US Mail lost my check.
Mm.
Most companies still pay through a physical check through Net 30, Net 45, which means the work that I did back in November, I'm just getting paid for. So there's a humongous lag. And
Mm.
there's the risk of like, all right, your check is lost. Now they have to issue another check. What if that one gets lost? That's happened to me. What happens if a client doesn't pay? What do you do then? You need a lawyer. You need to make sure your contract is legit. You have to take them to court. I've gone through all of these things. Um, so there, I'm not going to lie and say this is a perfect scenario. There's many times when I think about, sometimes it would just be easier to just wake up, log in, do some work for a company, and not have to worry about it anymore and have nice health benefits and not have to worry about paying all these other things, because health benefits are not cheap. In New Jersey, where I'm at, for a family of four, health benefits range between $2,500 to $3,000 a month. So if
Mm.
you build that into your rate, then it's okay. But when you're starting out and you pay a couple $100 a month for the same plan, jumping up 10x of that is quite a hefty pill to swallow. So if someone is in a situation where they're evaluating if they want to kind of get into something like this, I would recommend them saying, hey, if you can, take on a client that you can handle in the evening on your off time. See if this is something you really enjoy doing.
Yeah.
Also, ask yourself the question, do you get bored easily? Me, I get bored easily. If I stay at a client for a couple of years, I start getting really, really bored. I like constant change. I'm always influenced by new apps, new people, new interactions, learning new things. And so I found myself getting bored if I was at a job for 3 or 4 years, and I just get stagnant. And so I
Mm.
found when I started consulting and taking on these bigger projects at night, that I would then have a newfound vigor for learning and expanding. And then at that point, that fed into everything else of like, oh, I just learned this new technology, which is difficult. Let me talk about it online, or let me share it through a blog or speak about it, which then led to more opportunities. And everything just kind of manifested itself and snowballed from that point in time. And it's what attracted me, because I was able to always have something new to do.
Yeah.
But there is a level of risk with that. Sometimes you're not going to have clients. You need to always be out there and in the public eye, in my opinion, to make sure that you're always, keeping your pipeline full of possibilities and sales.
Yeah, totally. And it sounds like what worked well for you back in the day was you were able to dip your toe in the water in some sense, right? Because you had
Yeah.
those bands or those other people who you were able to build those Flash websites for.
Yeah.
So, how did you do that? Like, was that just through your network? And in today's world, like, we have all these things that probably didn't exist back then. Like, I'm forgetting the names of like Upwork or like these other. Yeah. So how would you recommend someone today who wants to dip their toe in the water? How would they go about doing that?
That's great. So I always recommend this worked great for me. The same thing. Start blogging immediately. If you don't have a blog, even if you think about what you're going to talk about, everybody else has talked about before, write about it anyway, because you might explain it a
That's
little
great
bit
advice.
differently than
Mhm.
everybody else, and it might make more sense.
Yep.
And to give the perfect analogy, I went to a DroidCon NYC a few years ago, and I saw something on the roster. One of the presentations was the Android lifecycle, and immediately in my head, I'm like, why is there a talk on the Android lifecycle? This is like so common. Like, why do we need to talk on this? And I said, that's weird. It's in the main room, and I'm like, what? Like, I didn't understand it.
Mm.
Um, and then I walked in when that talk was happening, standing room only. The place was packed. The presentation was phenomenal. Explained it with graphs that the speaker had created, in such a way that just blew my socks off. And I had been working with it for many years at that point. So even if you think it's already out there, share it. Doesn't matter if it's on a blog. It doesn't matter if it's anything of that nature. And then what's going to end up happening is people are going to start seeing that kind of stuff and reach out to you just for more consulting opportunities. But if you want to start finding some immediately, sites like Upwork, TopTal, or any of these other ones out there, or even Craigslist, those are valid ones out there. You just have to make sure that you vet them correctly, because you're going to see some really shady jobs like, hey, build me a Spotify clone for $500. Like that's no, it's not going to happen. It's not realistic. But there are tons of opportunity out there. I have a friend of mine who's well renowned in his industry, and he does a lot of programming too. And he wanted to make some extra money, so he hopped on Upwork and found a client that was, I think it was in Pennsylvania or something like that, and he's up in Connecticut, and did some work for him. Ended up being that this guy was highly connected to a plethora of other people. He was so impressed with the work that my friend did, he referred him to the other places, and now this guy's got literally endless amounts of work just through one, good job over on Upwork. And this continues to happen. So it doesn't matter if you're a project manager, a copywriter, designer, a programmer, whatever. You can go there, take these small projects, and then make sure that you manage them appropriately. I would just be careful with anything that's fixed bid, because those things can kind of get out of control quickly if you don't manage the change management process. But they are a good place to dip your toes in just to see if it's something for you and to grow your network. But the key thing is, all this is growing your network. And just to give you like one quick tip here too, let's say that you're a SEO expert and you want to actually start building that business. You could then reach out to a local real estate investment group that's like a meetup and tell them, hey, I'd like to give you guys a presentation on how to boost, like 5 tips on to boost your SEO on your real estate websites. You go, just go give them the talk there. Just by being in front of the real estate pros, you're going to be the expert. Now, one of them might need your help. They might not. They might 2 months down the road talk to somebody else who needs that help, and all of a sudden you get this referral from a talk you did 2-3 months ago. So it's all about just continually and building your network.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that I want to underscore one point you made about the blogging aspect, because even if there's someone who wrote a blog about it, you writing the same blog in your own words has so much value. And I think the analogy for me, and I think also for you, I've been doing YouTube for a while. You're, I think, also starting out on YouTube. You have a bunch of content out there. The way I think about it is that if there is a video about a topic that I want to do, that's not a deterrent for me to do that video. In fact, that's more reason, because hey, that means people are already looking for it. I can learn from that. I can digest it in my own mind, put it in my own words, and put it out there. So I'll learn a lot, and probably other people may benefit as well. So I feel like that's a really, really important point.
It is. And it goes back to, it's a very common thing in business. Like a lot of people will want to start a business and say, well, there's already a business that does X, Y, and Z. I can't have a startup that does that, or I can't start a company that does this because that already exists. Well, if you go look at things like Facebook, well, MySpace was around before Facebook, and before MySpace was Friendster, and before that there was something else. These things have been around for a while, and all it just proves that there's an existing market. So like you said, if there's a blog post that talks about something that you want to write about, do it anyway. That just means that there's a market for it. It means people are searching for it already, and you'll get traffic. You touched on this a little bit for the consulting. I want to talk about, how do you charge? Because this is actually, I'm a noob. I haven't really done much consulting. I've done like one small thing in the past, but there's like hourly consulting. There's like a per week thing, or there's fixed bid, which is what I think you referred to earlier, which is like, I'm going to put a bid out for the whole project. How do you think about the different options, and what's kind of the best way? Yeah. So the 3 most common that you're going to hear about are going to be hourly, value-based, which is like, hey, I have a day rate, a weekly rate, a monthly rate. And then you're gonna have the fixed bid project. Just so you know, I charge 99.9% of all my clients are on hourly, just simply because I take a lot of staff augmentation clients, and staff augmentation is you're basically another member of their staff for a project. You could come in as a lead to help them out and so forth. Now there is the value-based pricing model, which is the day, the week, and the month. And you'll find a lot of people online will say, aim for the value base. I'm not going to argue with that. If you can get a value-based client, which basically says, hey, I'm $1,000 a day, or I'm $5,000 a week, or $10,000 a week, whatever your rate is, whatever you decide on, if you can find someone that agrees to that and will pay you on that, that can make life a lot easier, because then you're not tied to a specific hour. However, businesses will always reverse engineer the dollar amount into an hourly amount. That's just how they work. So if you're saying, hey, I'm going to charge you $800 a day, immediately the business owner is just going to do the math and say, hey, that's $100 an hour. Okay, yeah, that's fine. I'll take you. Or if you tell them a weekly rate, hey, it's going to be, $4,000 a week. Again, they're going to do the math. That's $100 an hour. Like, okay, no big deal. So the allure there is that, well, it's a day rate, so I can then provide value. And if it's done in 4 hours or 6 hours, it doesn't matter. I just get paid the same amount. That is the allure there. And some clients are all right with that as long as you're providing the value. I found that hard to do with programming, simply because you are, providing a widget at the end of the day that someone's going to take and do something else with. With SEO, with anything like that, where you can actually affect the bottom line, copywriting, that value can be tremendous, because just by changing the words on a web page or the simple design, you can actually drive up revenue significantly.
Mm-hmm.
So some of the industries are a little bit different. Now, lastly, you have, again, if you can get on those types of projects, go for it. They're just really hard to find, in my opinion. You're going to find it much easier when you're starting out to just start with an hourly rate. Almost all conversations you're going to have with any client is always going to have somewhere in the initial conversation about, okay, well, what's your hourly rate, or how much do you charge? And they're almost always referring to an hourly rate. The last one is fixed bid. And fixed bid is going to be, hey, I need this app. And we'll use the programming example. I need this app. Can you provide me a bid on how much you think it's going to cost? Now, there's a lot of ways to estimate software. There's tremendous books written on it, but you can even go online and say, online app estimator, and you'll see people that say, hey, I want Facebook login, I want Google login, I want my own custom Node.js backend, I want you to write with it, I want Apple and Android apps, and you run these through the calculator, and it's like, all right, that's going to cost you $250,000. So you have to sometimes get your clients down to like a realistic number. So I had a client that came to me, and this is very often with Android. We have an iPhone app. We need to make this into an Android app. And I would just estimate the screen, saying, all right, each screen is going to be $8 to $12 hours, probably minimum per screen. On average, some screens might take me 2 hours, some might take me 3 days, but on average, they might be 8 to 12. And at that point, I would just start estimating it out, tests and everything. And I had a particular client who wanted something. I said, all right, the app that you want right now is going to cost you anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000. They were floored. That was way too much for them. That was a fixed bid project, which is kind of one of the tips I give here is I never give a exact amount. That's going to be $10,000. I always give a range. I'll say, hey, that's going to be $10,000 to $15,000. And they're going to ask why. I said, well, if nothing happens and you give me the exact spec and I have zero questions and everything is in there, that's $10,000. If you change one thing, it starts going up. And that has to be managed in a fixed bid project, because as soon as they change one thing, you're now changing part of the spec. That usually adds time. And so you have to manage that in a fixed bid project. That's one of the reasons why I stay away from them, because it just turns into an administrative nightmare. And then when you come back to the client and say, hey, you wanted this change, here's a change request form, they just feel like they're being nickeled and dimed to death. So I'll give them a range, say, hey, it's going to take, $10 to $15 or $10 to $20,000. They're going to always want to focus on the low number. Now, what I tell them is at the low number, sometimes what we can do is we can shave off some of the features and we can lower the price even more, and we'll get you like an MVP out the door. And then once you're happy with that, then we can come back in and maybe kind of do an hourly thing for another feature or another feature. That's actually the secret of fixed bids that I learned from a recruiter, is that a lot of consultants will stay away from fixed bids, but you can actually use a fixed bid as actually a door into an hourly gig. So you can get in, create something, maybe shave the price down a lot just to get them an MVP to show how you work with them so they can kind of build that rapport.
They trust you at that point.
Yeah. And then at that point, you can secure the customer contract for a longer engagement through an hourly rate. Say, hey, all right, well, this is going to take me about 8 hours to do that. Let's just do this on an hourly basis. Or you can work out some other type of deal with them.
It sounds to me like those three approaches are all kind of based on, okay, here's Don's kind of his typical hourly or weekly rate, and I'm going to charge based on that. How about the other direction, which is that this company wants to build an Android app. They already have an iPhone app, which is having $100,000 of revenue or some amount of value in the iPhone app.
Yep.
And you can say, hey, I'll build the Android app for you. And based on the revenue you're getting from iPhone, the amount of business value I'm providing is X. And therefore, I should be justified in being able to charge you some percent of X. So does that ever work in terms of negotiations, or do you approach it like that? Or is it always based on like, here's what I always charge?
It can work. It depends on your ability to sell your services.
Mm.
When you start consulting, you run all sides of your business. You run the accounting, you run the admin, you are the salesperson. So you have to start learning a lot about the actual sales process and how to sell people on value. So instead of selling someone a drill, you don't want to tell them about the features of the drill. You want to
Yeah,
tell them
exactly.
about how much time it's going to save them by putting that hole in the wall for you, because that's the value. So you want to be able to sell that value. And if you can sell the value, then you can sell your services at a more value-based rate. So it all comes down to skill in the sales department there.
Gotcha. What's the biggest mistake that you see newer people in consulting make with this kind of pricing discussion?
They don't charge enough. Most people right out of the gate, when they are a full-time employee, will say, hey, I'm going to go do consulting. They'll take their hourly rate, they'll divide it by 2080, which is the number of hours you'll work in a year if
Mm-hmm.
you work full-time. And they'll say, hey, that's $35 an hour. Cool. I'm going to charge $35 an hour. It's the same amount I make at my job and I'll be good. What they don't realize is that's not actually how much they get paid. So if you have benefits, time off, all that stuff, as a consultant, I don't have paid time off. I don't have holidays off. When I'm sick, I don't get paid. So all of that has to be built into my hourly rate so I can afford to take those days off. So if you're making $80,000 at your job, you're probably making anywhere between $96,000 to $112,000 a year with your benefits.
Hmm.
Your company's paying for your health, a large chunk of your health insurance through the group plan, paying for dental, 401k, any of the other perks that you have. So people don't usually charge enough. And since consulting is a feast or famine type of business, meaning when the going's good, it's real good. And when the going's bad, it can get real bad. You have to plan for those famine times. So you have to make sure you're charging enough so you can stock away enough cash. So when you maybe don't have a client, which will happen, your full-time job is now finding a client. And if you've put away money, you now have, a nice buffer of 6 months or whatever to live off of. So you can go find a job real quickly. And if you're out there blogging, videos, sharing content, doing whatever, you're not going to have a hard time finding a
Right.
position. There's just so many jobs out there that are available, and my clients can't seem to find enough people to fulfill all of them at all.
Got it. Makes sense. I want to connect this to another thing that I know you care a lot about, or you talk a lot about, financial freedom.
Mhm.
What does that mean to you? Does that mean like I work 6 months, take 6 months off, retire early? What else? Like, how do you think about financial freedom?
So financial freedom for me is I no longer have to work ever again. So I'm not there. That's my true mission for financial freedom. And that's where my assets are paying for my lifestyle. And I don't have to go to work unless I want to. That to me is the true definition of freedom. I can do whatever I want to do. I can say whatever I want to say. Nothing can happen to me because I am financially free living off my assets. Maybe that's through real estate. Maybe that's through a startup that you've built and you've sold. But at that point in time, I no longer have to do anything whatsoever. Now, I know other people define that as being able to take off 6 months. That's not the case. I do have autonomy, which I do value tremendously. So I can tell my client, hey, I'm not going to be there till 2 o'clock today because I got something going on. Like that's autonomy. Like I don't have to be there at 8 in the morning because they say I have to be there 8 in the morning, unless that's in my contract and I can negotiate that. So I think there's a difference between there. A lot of people think that the freedom, financial part, they get that confused with autonomy. But for financial freedom for me, it just means never having to work again and having my assets cover everything.
I'd love to hear how you square the consulting business with this financial freedom, like FIRE, right? It's like,
Yeah.
retire early. You have like a nest egg, you can live off of dividends. So here's my thought. Like there's this very pretty famous thought leader, right? Naval Ravikant.
Oh yeah. I know. Well,
Right. So yeah, Naval, right? He talks about building wealth. It's like
yeah.
a pretty famous tweet thread about building wealth. And what he
Great.
talks about repeatedly is the way you become wealthy is by owning something which increases in value over time.
Yes.
And I'm a big believer in that. I think Silicon Valley in some ways is founded on that principle of like you have a startup and then you grow it, you invest in it, and it turns out to be $1 billion company, and now you're enormously wealthy. And it seems to me like the lifestyle that you do have the autonomy like locally, like right now you can dictate whatever you want, but correct me if I'm wrong, but you're not actually getting ownership in the companies that will get to 100x multiplier in terms of equity, right? So how do you think about that those two things in tension?
Yeah, good question. So, in regards to consulting, I've been offered positions at all of the significant clients that I've been at, good packages. So, from Groupon to MyFitnessPal, to Active to, I mean, every company I've been at has tried to hire me and offer me great packages. The the thing that I see with startups is, in my opinion, that startups, from an employee perspective or consulting perspective, if I were to take a job at them, it's a lottery ticket.
Yeah.
That's how I see most startups. And unless you are in the door of one of these startups, probably first 5 employees, or if you're an Uber, like you're the first 10 employees, maybe first 100, you're not really going to make enough money off of the sell of the company to retire and just be done.
Mm.
Had been offered a great package at MyFitnessPal. They were acquired by Under Armour for $480 million. That would have been a nice little chunk of change that maybe I could have gone and bought a house with. That was it. I mean, nothing else really out there that's would have been significant. So I don't um, look to take a position at these companies just because I see them as a lottery ticket. And I've seen so many of these startups fail. I've worked for so many apps that have failed that I don't mention because they're no longer around.
Mm.
For me, if I'm charging at a high enough rate, I can then take that money and then go invest it in other types of assets. Could be real estate. I could put a little bit in crypto. I could put something else over in some other type of investment vehicle. I could invest it into, I could be an angel investor if I'm living correctly and well under my means. I had a
Mm.
friend of mine who got me into consulting early on in 2009. He was a single guy, lived in Minneapolis. And I remember one time we're sitting on some drinks one time, and I said, you're consulting. And I'm like, why don't you, like, I asked him why he didn't go charge more. And he goes, I live so far under my means. He goes, I only use 10% of what I charge. He goes, I have so much money in the bank. He goes, in 5 or 6 years, I'm not going to ever have to work again. Like, he was just, living at that level, and just investing all of his stuff. Now, that does mean that you have to charge the right amount and live below your means. And so, what is the other option? It is owning your own company, and that's kind of what I've done on the side. When I've done consulting, I built Caster.io, which was a membership-based site, and an attempt to go down that route. And I've actually created other SaaS applications as well that haven't worked as well. But those ended up in the startup graveyard, as they say, because not everything can make a $1 billion IPO.
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, like if I'm saying that back to you, the chance of a 10x, 100x outcome in a startup, it is so low, like a lottery ticket, like you
Yeah,
mentioned, that you would rather be in control of what you're getting through having a fixed rate through consulting, and then you can dictate where you put that money in asset allocation, right?
exactly. Yeah, because a lot of the times the client, I'll actually, every single time, if I would have taken a full time job, I would have taken a tremendous pay cut because
Mm.
my consulting rates are that much higher that I would take a humongous pay cut for them. And so I have to weigh that benefit of, like, okay, if I take that pay cut and they make it to an IPO, how much more better off am I going to be?
Yeah.
If they do make an IPO or do get acquired, I will most likely end up with more money. But that's
Mm.
the risk assessment and my risk tolerance that I have to take into that consideration based upon what I've seen. What's the chance of that happening? And I've always decided to bet on myself, then, because I can control my own destiny,
Totally.
than to bet on a company and the decisions of people that I have no influence over.
Yeah. And then real quick, do you have any strong opinions about the actual asset allocation, gold, crypto, real estate, index fund? Do you have any, how do you think about that?
I'm leaning more towards real estate. Um, I have some stocks and then a little bit in crypto. Not putting everything in one spot. That's the key there for me. But I'm leaning more towards real estate, just a hard asset.
I wanted to round out the discussion with health and fitness.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned at the top of the program, at the top of the session about the hard 75, and you kept working out, and now you're like day 240 or something of
Mhm.
working out every single day. So, what prompted the kind of fitness obsession that you're living through right now?
Yeah. The Back in my teenage years, I used to race motocross, and that kept me in shape. It was very difficult, so I was always in shape. And then when I went to college, I wasn't racing anymore. And so I just kind of just joined the gym. And I've always been a member of a gym, and I just went every day. Didn't know what I was really doing. And then so I just kind of kept at it after a while. But the problem is really terrible eating habits. I would just eat like garbage, fast food, cookies, cakes, whatever, and figured I could just out train a bad diet. And I did that for, I don't know, 16, 17 years.
Mm.
And then finally, I had a trainer and I said, look, I want a six pack. And I'd never had a six pack. And I said, I just want to be able to see a six pack. And he put me on a diet and he's like, and then he cut my workouts in half. And I was
Mm.
like, this is crazy. And then within 6 to 8 weeks, I started seeing a six pack and it blew me away. And it made me realize everything in health and fitness is basically all done in the kitchen and about what you put in your mouth.
Yeah.
Um, and then I've kind of just always stayed into fitness. And then the
By
last,
the way, just for I'm sure I'm curious. I'm sure everyone else is. What was that diet?
what was it? Oh, the diet was, I mean, there was no, he was a bodybuilder and there was no, it wasn't paleo, wasn't like, keto or nothing like that. It was just low carb, high protein. Um, I ate lots of lean meats, not even a lot, just like 8 ounces. I had a salad every day for lunch. In the morning was a couple of eggs and like some Ezekiel toast and some like honey. Just kind of regular. I had the same, I don't know, 8 meals for 3 months.
Okay.
And at first, it felt like a lot of food, but then by the end of the first week, it didn't feel like a lot of food. And then it got kind of nice because everything just got on autopilot. I would go to the store. I knew the exact things I needed to buy. Life actually got easier.
Yeah.
And it felt great. But then when it got to this year with the whole pandemic, I decided there wasn't much. I felt a lot of my life was out of my control. There was a lot of decisions being made by my governor and the government that I had no control over. And so you just start feeling kind of hopeless and out of control. And I've studied stoicism for a long time and thought, well, how can I fix this? And that's going to be just controlling what I can control. And I thought, well, I can control what I put in my mouth and I can control my fitness. And I have enough equipment at home. I'm just going to do that at home. And so I just started on that. And then I've been doing intermittent fasting for 5 years now, about 6 years actually, and decided to just start doing intermittent fasting with the 75 hard program. And then once a week, on top of just the regular intermittent fasting, I would throw in a full 24-hour fast. And then I just doing that alone, just lost any additional fat that I had and got in the best shape of my life. And I'm still there and it feels great. And one of the reasons why I think it's important is because anyone who works hard on their health and fitness, and you can see it and physically, you'll know that they've had a lot of discipline. It automatically boosts your confidence, and it also just lowers stress completely because you're just always working the stress out through a physical activity.
Right, exactly. And that's what I find interesting about your journey is that it goes beyond, like you alluded to this, it goes beyond like the physical benefit, right? It's like this, the COVID pandemic, there's so much in the world that you can't control. This is something you can control. You can dictate when you go to the gym, how much you're running, how much you're doing all this stuff, how much you're sleeping. It's like a mindset, right? So yeah, what advice do you have to like people who keep falling off the wagon and like they can't go for more than a couple of days and they eat that donut or whatever it is, right? How do you stay away from that?
They think a challenge like this helps, even if it's like a Whole30 challenge or 75 hard is pretty extreme for most people. But to tell you the truth, it's possible for anybody. As the guy who created it, Andy Frisella, stated on one of his podcasts, you know what, if you can, even if you're wheelchair bound, if you can move your arms or something, if you can move some part of your body, you can work out something. You can do it. And I had the biggest excuse when this program first came out. The hardest part of it is you have two workouts. One is in a regular workout for 45 minutes. And then the other one has to be outside for 45 minutes. It doesn't matter if it's rain, sleet, snow, lightning, you have to be outside.
And you're in New Jersey, right? So it must be pretty cold.
Yeah, it gets cold in the winter. And then it rains hard in the summer. And that was my biggest excuse. I have two smaller children. Like I can't just leave in the middle of the day to go for an outdoor workout. Sure, they can be inside, watching a movie and I could check on them. What am I going to walk down the street and walk back? That doesn't make any sense. And so I had this self-limiting belief of like, I can't do this. And so I realized I can just go out in my backyard. I can just walk around my backyard for 200 laps. I mean, it's a small backyard, but hey, a walk is considered an exercise. I can just grab a couple dumbbells and I can walk with those, do like a farmer's carry. That's what got me over the hump. And that's what I think people need to realize is that a lot of everything you do is all self-limiting beliefs. And if you can have a challenge and find an accountability group to help you keep accountable, those things can kind of keep you moving forward. And even if the challenge seems too like daunting, like 75 hard did for me, you can break it up. And that's what I did with mine. I thought, well, there's no way I can do 75 days. I'm going to do this for 10 days. And that's what I told myself. I'll do it for 10 days. And then when I got to 10 days, I said, well, all right, well, can I make it to 21? Because 21 is the magic number, according, to folks like James Clear from Atomic Habits. And if I make it 21 days, it'll be a habit. Yeah. If I can make it to 21, I'll be good. And I kept going. I hit 21 days. I said, all right, if I've made it 21 days, I think I can do this. And then I just said, all right, I'm going to see how far I can go. And then I just went from there.
Yeah, I feel like so much of this is about like tricking your brain, tricking your mind into actually getting started. And once you get started, it becomes easier to keep going.
And at that point, it's routines too. You have to build routines. You have to build triggers into everything that you do. I drink still to this day, I drink a gallon of water a day. But there's a certain way that I do it. I drink 14 ounces, then I drink 26 ounces, then I drink another 26 ounces, and then I mix 26 ounces with some greens. And there's just this method to my madness that works for me. And you have to find out what works for you. And it's going to take you 10 plus days to figure that out when you get into programs.
Yeah, so you mentioned the same thing with the diet, right? Like you had the same 8 meals week over week for I don't know how long. And I feel like that routine makes it, in my mind, it makes it easier for you not to have excuses, because like there's some things you already figured out. There's no thinking involved. So now you can really focus your mind on the thing that, you might actually be less happy or optimistic about. You can focus on that and just get it done, because all these other distractions are not in your life.
Yeah. And what you end up finding when you do these types of things, especially on these longer programs, is when you eliminate all of these other extraneous variables of your life, of decisions about what I'm going to eat tonight and decisions about what time I'm going to work out. If you just have these programs,
right, exactly,
you limit the decision fatigue you have. And then what ends up happening is all this stuff that's been churning in the background starts migrating its way forward. And these could be things that you just need to process on a personal level. Could be something that happened to you as a child. Could be something that happened at work that you've never processed. And that's what a lot of the change comes from, is just these mental changes, because you're getting in such good shape. You're not even thinking about these things anymore, like the physical aspects. And then the mental things start coming forward, and then you get to work on that. So it is twofold, definitely big time.
I love that. So Don, is there anything, we talked about financial freedom, health and fitness, software consulting, your journey into tech. Is there something that we didn't cover that you want to talk about?
No, it's been great. Thanks for having me on. There's been fantastic questions. I really appreciate it. And it's been great. And I hope it helps everyone out there.
No, I mean, it was helpful for me. I'm sure helpful for a bunch of people. And you're all over the place on the internet, YouTube, Twitter. What are the best places for people to connect with you or learn more about you?
Yeah, the best place is going to be those three that you named. Is going to be Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. And it's just Don Felker on all three of them. You can just search on there and you'll find me. And usually have a red shirt on as my avatar. So in there.
Cool. I'll leave links to all that in the description. I appreciate you spending Super Bowl Sunday with me. We actually are missing the Super Bowl right now while we're talking. So I appreciate that we're able to spend this time together, and I'm sure a lot of people will benefit.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you.